Students, now we have to talk about the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement, that why this happened, why Gandhiji withdrew the non-cooperation movement. So Gandhiji withdrew the non-cooperation movement because of the Chauri Chaura incident. So students, non-cooperation movement touched every section of society. Non-cooperation movement reached to its peak and Britishers were frightened by non-cooperation movement. But the Chauri Chaura incident of 1922 led to the withdrawal of this movement. So the movement became violent in some of the places in February 1922. Chauri Chaura in Uttar Pradesh, people turned very violent and set fire to the police station. 22 policemen were also killed in this incident, and Gandhiji was against any violence, any sort of violence he was against. So movement slowed down in urban areas. He thought that it was very necessary to train the people in non-violent satyagraha, because people were not aware that how to be a satyagrahi and how to fight with non-violent strategy. So here we have to see the significance of the non-cooperation movement, that what is the importance of this movement which was launched by Gandhiji. So students, earlier also I have told you that non-cooperation movement touched every section of the society. The non-cooperation movement reached to its peak and Britishers were frightened by this movement. So this non-cooperation movement was a large-scale movement. It attracted common people from all social groups. So from all the social groups, whether peasants, whether tribals, whether the industrial workers, common people in the cities, so all got attracted to this call given by the Gandhiji. So non-cooperation and Khilafat movement went together. So together Gandhiji, if you remember, he launched this movement in January 1921. So this promoted Hindu-Muslim unity. So this was the one of the best outcomes from this movement. Hindu-Muslim unity was promoted. Then we have seen peasants and tribal movements. They also became the part of Indian national movement. So we have seen the peasants movement in the countryside and the tribal movements in the hills, in the Gudam hills of Andhra Pradesh. So these kinds of movement also became a part of Indian national movement. So it was a non-violent movement. Okay, so Gandhiji stressed on non-violence only. So it popularized Gandhian idea of non-violent satyagraha. So always Gandhiji believed in non-violence only, and these movements also laid emphasis on his strategy of non-violent satyagraha. So now we have to discuss the Simon Commission 1928. So this commission was headed by Sir John Simon. Okay, so it was a statutory commission set up by the British under the Sir John Simon. So the name is very important, Sir John Simon. Now it was asked to study the constitutional system in India and suggest the changes. So the task was given to Sir John Simon regarding drafting of Indian constitution. So this commission was headed by Sir John Simon, was given the task to draft the Indian constitution. So Indians opposed this Simon commission. So Indians, they opposed this Simon commission because all the members of commission were Englishmen only, and there was no Indians in it. So it was greeted by all the parties with the slogan "Go back Simon." So it did not provide any hope to the of Swaraj to the Indians. So Indians were not having any hope to attain Swaraj through these through formation of these kind of commissions, because no Indian member was there in this commission, and they were here to draft the constitutional system in India, and again all Englishmen were there. So this was opposed by the Indians. So now Lahore session of Congress 1929. So in December 1929, Lahore session under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru passed a resolution demanding Poon Swarajya, that is full independence. So the Congress session was held at Lahore in 1929. Very important one mark question. Lahore session 1929 under the presidency or presidentship of Jawaharlal Nehru, and following decisions were taken. So it was declared that 26 January 1930 would be celebrated as Independence Day, but this was not achieved. Okay, so this was decided that 26 January every year they are going to celebrate as Independence Day. Then after that, Congress declared Poon Swaraj as its aim, that this is our aim, we have to achieve Poon Swaraj, that is full independence. And it was decided to start a civil disobedience movement to achieve this aim. So Gandhiji had another idea to go with civil disobedience movement. Now the ground was very fertile for the launch of civil disobedience movement. So now we have to discuss developments that led to the launch of CDM, that is Civil Disobedience Movement. So earlier also we have talked about the Salmon Commission. So Indians launched a powerful struggle against the Salmon Commission 1928. Okay, so Salmon Commission came, they came for drafting of Indian Constitution, but it was opposed as no Indian member was there. So the government resorted to repression. Okay, so they suppressed the people, their anger which was against the Salmon Commission. So brutally they repressed the protest which was launched against the Salmon Commission by the Indians. So students, we were discussing that why the civil disobedience movement was launched, or towards civil disobedience movement. So the another reason, first we have discussed the Salmon Commission, then the Great Depression also of 1929 made the life of the Indians highly miserable, especially the farmers. So they were also, the economy was also affected, the farmers, they were also affected. Then the Lahore conspiracy and Meerut conspiracy cases were also, the people were also angry against such kind of conspiracies against the Indians. Then the Lahore Congress of 1929 declared Poon Swaraj. So this was the aim of which was declared, that we are going to attain this, the Poon Swaraj, and decided to launch the civil disobedience movement. So there they have made the ground very fertile, and their aim was to attain the Poon Swaraj, and for attainment of their goal they decided to launch the civil disobedience movement. So Gandhiji inaugurated this movement by breaking the salt law at Dandi. The very important topic, students, now salt march. So Mahatma Gandhiji found in salt a powerful symbol that could unite the nations, and salt was something consumed by rich and the poor alike, and it was one of the most essential items of the food. And you know, the tax on salt and the government monopoly over its production, Mahatma Gandhiji revealed the most oppressive phase of the British rule, that imposing a tax on even the common commodity which is consumed equally by all the sections of the society. So Gandhiji decided to launch the civil disobedience movement by breaking the salt law, that now in civil disobedience movement we will disobey the laws which are imposed on us by the Britishers. So Gandhiji decided to inaugurate the civil disobedience movement by breaking the salt law. So how he did, now let's see the course of salt march or the Dandi march. So Gandhiji and 78 of his followers started a march on foot from Sabarmati ashram to Dandi. Okay, so he started with his volunteers, with his followers from his ashram Sabarmati. Then after that, on 31st January 1930, Mahatma Gandhiji sent a letter to the Viceroy Irwin stating 11 demands. And Mahatma Gandhiji letter was in a way an ultimatum was also given to the British government, that if demands were not fulfilled, then by 11th March the letter stated the Congress would launch a civil disobedience movement. So Irwin was unwilling to negotiate, so Gandhiji started a famous march accompanied by 78 of his trusted volunteers. So march was over 240 miles. Okay, so this much they have covered, 240 miles from Gandhiji ashram in Sabarmati to Dandi. So the volunteers walked for 24 days, about 10 miles a day, and on 6th April he reached Dandi, and he violated the law by manufacturing salt by boiling water. So on 6th April they reached Dandi, this only I have told you, and Gandhiji prepared salt by using a seawater and broke the salt law and inaugurated the civil disobedience movement. And the government imposed this also, I have told you, monopoly was there, and they used to impose the heavy tax on the salt, and moreover on the production also the monopoly of the government was there. Therefore Gandhiji opposed the salt law. So now let's see the main features of civil disobedience movement. So Gandhiji broke the salt law, at Dandi and inaugurated the civil disobedience movement. So people broke salt law in many places. So similarly, following Gandhiji's footstep, people broke the salt law at other many places also. So similarly, foreign goods were boycotted, liquor shops were picketed, government servants again resigned their jobs, forest laws were broken, protected and reserved forests where the pastoralists and other tribal people, they were not allowed to enter into the jungles. Then people refused to pay taxes. Okay, so they refused that we are not going to pay any taxes. So obviously leaders were arrested, workers attacked the government offices. So we were discussing the main features of the civil disobedience movement, and I have told you that people refused to pay taxes in civil disobedience movement. Then after that, I have told you that Gandhiji started the civil disobedience movement by breaking the salt law. Then people started breaking the forest law. So one more important feature of this movement, that in civil disobedience movement, women participation was huge. They participated in protest marches, manufactured salt, and went to jail also. So now the colonial government was very worried by the developments. Okay, the colonial government began arresting the Congress leaders one by one. So when Abdul Ghaffar Khan was arrested, angry crowds demonstrated on the streets of Peshawar. Many were killed also. And when Gandhiji himself was arrested, angry people attacked police posts, municipal buildings, railway stations. So the frightened government responded with the policy of brutal repression. Peaceful satyagrahis were attacked. Women, children were beaten by the Britishers. So Mahatma Gandhiji once again decided to call off the movement on 5th March 1931, and he entered into the Gandhi-Irvine Pact. And according to this pact, Gandhiji consented to participate in round table conference, and government agreed to release the political prisoners which they have arrested. So in December 1931, Gandhiji went to London for the conference, but negotiations broke down and he returned disappointed and empty-handed. Now back in India, Gandhiji discovered Ghaffar Khan, Nehru were both in jail. Congress had been declared illegal by the Britishers. So Gandhiji relaunched the civil disobedience movement. For over a year, the movement continued, but by 1934, it lost its momentum. So now let's discuss the difference between the non-cooperation movement and the civil disobedience movement. Both the movements you have seen Gandhiji launched in order to attain the Swaraj. So people refused to cooperate with government during the non-cooperation movement. But people broke the laws during the civil disobedience movement. Like Gandhiji started civil disobedience movement by breaking the salt law. Similarly, people started breaking the forest laws, going into the reserve forest to collect wood and graze cattle. So this was the first difference. Second, Muslim participated in large number in the non-cooperation movement. If you remember the Khilafat non-cooperation movement, it was launched in order to foster Hindu-Muslim unity. But Muslim participation was very less in the civil disobedience movement. So less participation of Muslims. Third point now, no tax campaign was not there in non-cooperation movement, but people refused to pay taxes in civil disobedience movement. Like peasants refused to pay revenue and chowkidari taxes. Okay. Then another difference you can talk about here is one more difference was related to women's participation. It was very less, the number of women participated in non-cooperation movement. But in civil disobedience movement, women participation was huge. They participated in protest marches, they manufactured salt and went to jail also. Now we have to discuss the social group which participated in the civil disobedience movement. That is how participants saw this movement, or social groups which participated in civil disobedience movement. Now we will see the meaning of civil disobedience movement for different groups. So let's start from the rich peasants. So first group, rich peasants. So depression was there in 1929 and fall in prices affected them badly. So they demanded reduction in land revenue. So Swaraj meant reduction of taxes for them. So this is the interpretation of this movement for the rich peasants, that they were affected because depression was there, economy was affected, so prices was there was fall in the prices, and they demanded reduction in land revenue. Okay, so this was their demand, that reduction in land revenue, and Swaraj meant for them reduction of taxes. Now let's see what was the interpretation by the poor peasants. Now depression also affected them badly. They demanded reduction in rent. So Swaraj meant reduction of rent for them. So Congress was unwilling to support poor peasants because it will upset then the big landlords. So this was the interpretation of rich peasants and poor peasants for civil disobedience movement. Now let's see the interpretation of civil disobedience movement by the business class. So they demanded the protection against the import of foreign goods. So they demanded protection against the import of foreign goods. They wanted a rupee sterling exchange rate that would discourage imports. So this was their demand. To organize business interests, they formed a different organization like the Indian Industrial and Commercial Congress in 1920. Then after that, they also formed the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries in 1927. So both these organizations were formed. Years are very important. Please keep in mind 1920 and 1927. So this is very important. It can be asked. So they gave financial help to the movement and refused to sell the foreign goods. So this was the interpretation or why the business class they joined the civil disobedience movement, for harnessing their interest only. So now let's see the case of industrial workers. So they did not participate in civil disobedience movement in large number. As industrialists came close to the Congress, so industrial workers they stayed aloof, and workers were poorly paid. Condition of work were also miserable. So Swaraj meant better wages for the workers. So conditions of work very miserable. So I told you Swaraj meant better working conditions and wages for them. Then railway workers, dockyard workers conducted strikes. Workers in mines wore Gandhi caps, and they also took part in the rallies.